I see myself. That's good. All right. Are we live? Let's go. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to Business Club's one-on-one event with Erik Berg, who is an experienced engineer, project manager, and contractor who has worked for many U.S. government programs and private companies under both the contracting firm ManTech and his own company, Tyton. This event is organized and hosted by the USC branch of the Business Club Network, Business SC. I'm your host, Giovanni Zarur, chairman of Business SC. Also, I'd just like to mention that we will be allocating some time for audience questions at the end of this panel. So if you're in the audience, please feel free to leave any questions you have in the live stream chat and we'll address them later. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Erik, could you please introduce yourself by giving your background, including your education, career timeline, and any extracurricular activities you do?
Sure. Thanks, Giovanni. Appreciate you helping orchestrate this with your team, and I'm excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity. I love doing this type of stuff. So about me, I was born and raised here in Los Angeles. Went to Chatsworth High School in San Fernando Valley. Went to UC San Diego, and I got a degree in physics and biophysics from there. I really fell in love with physics and kind of the problem solving aspect of things. And I always encourage as many people as possible in high school and college to take some physics to learn how to become a good problem solver. After that, my career really started at a research institute called Hub SeaWorld Research Institute down in San Diego. I was a physicist supporting biologists who were trying to examine the impacts of noise or other man-made sources of noise and impacts to wildlife species, including threatened and endangered species. After that, I made a transition to a small business called SRS Technologies, which was eventually bought up by the much larger company, a multi-billion dollar publicly traded company called ManTech. And about a year and a half ago, I fortunately got laid off by ManTech, which kind of inspired me to start my own small business. And now I've been in business for about a year and a half, and it's fun and exciting, and it's very collaborative in nature. So that's kind of my career path to where I am today and owning my own small business. As far as extracurricular activities, it's very important to find, I think, balance between yourself and your family and work. And for me, I've really found that through community service. I'm very interested in public education. And so I'm on the board of directors of a nonprofit foundation, which is actually California's oldest nonprofit, called the Pasadena Educational Foundation, that is focused on helping the school district achieve the great things that it's doing. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. I heard you mention something really interesting that I noticed is you thought everybody should study physics, and being that this is obviously a business panel, why specifically do you think people should study physics, in your opinion? And do you think that it contributes in any way to being a business or a businessman or a leader in any way?
I think it does. The beauty of physics and why I was drawn to it is it really gets you to ask the questions why, right? If you study physics the way that it's supposed to be studied. A lot of people like to take the formulas and then you just punch numbers in it and it spits out another number and there's your answer. That's not the intent of physics. The intent of taking physics classes is to ask and understand why things happen and contribute to other events happening. So that type of understanding it goes beyond business. It goes beyond physics. It goes beyond engineering. You will become a better thinker and a better problem solver if you ask those questions of why is something happening, right? It's kind of the crux of why I think it's so valuable.
Great, thank you. So, what type of engineering work have you done in your prior role with ManTech and now with Tyton? So, specifically, what projects have you worked on, and what is that engineering work entail?
Yeah, I've had a pretty interesting career from an engineering perspective, right? I'm not really doing engineering now because I'm more into program management and hiring engineers to do the interesting and fun stuff. I started out in acoustical engineering. So this was I was a physicist who was collecting, analyzing, and creating sound as it related to potentially impacting wildlife species, right? So an example is out of Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is in Central California. They're launching rockets that make a tremendous amount of noise when they launch, right? I don't know if anybody's seen them, but they're pretty cool to watch. Um, but local to that Air Force Base, there's a large population of marine mammals, so seals and sea lions. And so the Air Force, or I guess now Space Force, as being good stewards of that land, are interested in making sure that they're not having any impacts to those wildlife species. So I would be the guy that would do all the modeling, simulation analysis, collect the physical sound measurements, um, to determine what the sound profiles look like where the animals are. So I did a lot of that, a lot of digital signal processing, some software and systems development. And in working for a small business, it was great because they really pushed me outside of my comfort zone, and I started getting into IT work. Um, so it was kind of a broad experience from an engineering perspective, from hardware to software to signal processing. Um, from a program management perspective, um, the company that I worked for that was bought by ManTech,
Mhm.
they got work here local to me, which is in Pasadena, California, with Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So I was able to manage a team of engineers and scientists that did a lot of reliability, safety, and quality engineering. So JPL makes, multi-billion-dollar spacecraft and rovers, and they have teams of people that will help evaluate if those systems are going to perform properly, if they're built properly, if they're going to perform properly, and they're going to survive over their intended lifetime. I've also done program management for another contract that ManTech has for systems engineering and integration for launch vehicles. So I'm sure everybody's heard of the company SpaceX. They're launching rockets and putting security spacecraft into space. And so this contract was to help with the integration, which is the connection from the spacecraft system to the launch vehicle system so that it can go where it's got to go.
Interesting.
Now, and now with Tyton, I'm a very, very, very small business, but the plan is to kind of follow in those footsteps and do the same type of high-end engineering services for customers like NASA, the Space Force, and the Air Force.
Definitely. We'll get more into that later. Um, you said that you were working as an engineer for a smaller business at the time, and I'm assuming that um, you had no anticipation that it would get bought out by ManTech, and you would even end up going into the uh, contracting world, correct?
Well, the small business actually was part of the contracting world as well.
Oh, cool.
They performed similar type work, and that's why they bought the small business. But
Mhm.
when I joined that small business, I was just a junior engineer. I didn't understand the contracting world. I didn't understand how the business machine worked in support of the government customers. So I really didn't know what I was getting into when I took the position. I was just interested in the engineering.
Cool. So, up to this date, what do you think are your most significant career accomplishments?
That's a good question. Um, you know, I think probably the most exciting is the support that I've provided to JPL. I don't know if everybody knows, but a week from today, the Mars 2020 rover is going to be landing on the surface of Mars. And so the team that I managed did a tremendous amount of work in analyzing that system to make sure that it was going to operate properly. So anything JPL that I've had some connection to, I'm very excited about. I think we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but I helped ManTech win a $500 million IT contract also at JPL. And then in terms of like what I'm most proud about, you know, starting my own business was never really part of my plan. So I'm very proud of now that I'm in my 17th month and I'm profitable small business and surviving, you know, these strange times that we live
Great. Thank you.
in. Hmm.
How did you initially break into the contract world? What did it take to succeed when you first got started?
Yeah, so when I got my first job out of college, you know, things were a lot different than what you're experiencing nowadays. You know, my first real job in the contracting world. Prior to that, I was working two jobs. One, I was teaching physics classes, and then I was also doing some technician work. And I really just I found this company, and they were doing this acoustics work that I didn't know a lot about, but it sounded really interesting. And I was just very, very persistent in bugging that manager into giving me an opportunity. And then from there, that was kind of my entry point. Um, that's how I got started.
Okay. So what did it take to succeed when you first got started?
So that was with a nonprofit. I was with them for a little over a year or so, and then you know I was in the small business arena with SRS Technologies. You know, I would say being successful when you're first starting, you got to be willing to do anything. It not only provides you a growth and learning opportunity, but it also gets you exposed to probably a lot more people who start to build trust in you and then give you things to do. So I think my success was really because of my willingness to do anything, work hard, and learn. And those obviously not only benefit the business you're going to work for, but also benefit you as an individual tremendously.
And how did you showcase that to the people who were your higher ups at the time? Uh, in the sense of sort of making yourself stand out from your peers and showing to people that you deserve to climb up the ladder. What does that entail?
Um, you know, it's interesting because it's a very good question. I don't think I did much of anything. I was not a person that was interested in really bragging about my accomplishments, right? I took a very humble approach to things, but I was lucky in that I had great mentorship in my bosses and people that I really connected with. You know, not only on a work and engineering and personal basis, but they were the ones that really groomed me because I had no intention of going into program management or senior leadership within a company. It was all thanks to kind of the leaders that I had that I was working for. Now, where I am now, I realize everybody should take credit for what they do because your success in your job is dependent on you being able to toot your own horn and keep track of those things and representing yourself in a resume because your bonuses and your pay raises are all based on that type of stuff. So it's a good skill to have.
Cool, definitely is.
Yeah.
So now that you are on your own with Titan, what do you treasure most about just being an entrepreneur? And can you list out the challenges of going solo versus when you were working with ManTech?
Yeah. Um, so what I think I treasure most, right? I mean, where I was previously, I was with a multi-billion dollar, you know, publicly traded company, and it's not always easy to make decisions quickly when you're in a large business. Okay. So I treasure really the freedom to be able to make decisions on
Mhm.
things that I want to do and things that I think are important. There's a lot of flexibility on day to day if I want to go have coffee for 2 hours or join a Zoom call with you for a couple hours to talk about things. I have that flexibility, uh, and it's things that I want to do. So um, there are some pretty significant challenges, right? I mean, I'm in a WeWork facility here in Pasadena, and I think I've seen about 30% of the occupancy drop because of the whole coronavirus
Mm.
situation, which means that either people have gone out of business as small businesses, or they've had to reduce their costs and they're working from home. But I'm doing it in a very safe manner where I've got my glass cubicle here where I've got my own breathing space, just to note that. The challenge really is getting comfortable with uncertainty, right? When you're with a business, when you're in a job, you get a steady paycheck, you have benefits. Going out on your own and having to, dig up your own work and the uncertainty of payments and that type of stuff is a little bit unsettling. I'm comfortable with it now, but it took some time. I think the other challenge, or maybe the way to approach that type of stuff, is really taking calculated risks, right? And this is something I think that is important to understand how to do, is trying to weigh out what all the possibilities are, understand what the risks are, and then making the best decision based on your analysis.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in the business world, risk management is a very important and often used term, and that's for a valid reason. Because as you did mention, when you started going solo and you opened up your own company, you have all of these risks to deal with that are on your own back. There are liabilities that are in your name, so it's not you're sort of gaining the privilege to be your own boss, but at the same time, there's downsides to it.
Yeah,
So that's important. And thank you for your insight.
yeah,
So now let's go into a little bit more of the nitty gritty details on the actual contracting world.
hmm
Understanding that you work in the engineering services sector, can you please discuss what engineering services contracts specifically are, and sort of contrast it with other types of contracting?
yeah. So I'm a busy enough person that I don't want to mow my own lawn and do my own gardening. I tried to do that for some time, and I figured out I would be spending 6 to 8 hours in my backyard on a weekly basis, and I don't want to do that. So I want to outsource the work, right? Um, the government does the same thing. They figure, hey, can we get this done and get it done cheaper or faster or better by outsourcing? And they do that basically where it's to an advantage to the government. Um, there's what I've been exposed to primarily, and the types of contracts that they're letting out are either for product, like they say, hey, we need laptops, or hey, we need this type of spacecraft and you're going to build this for us, or services, engineering services, which is where I've primarily supported. So the engineering services, you're not actually delivering anything physical, right? You're not giving them a computer. You're giving them the experience and knowledge and expertise of the people that work for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And to follow up with that, how is how does a business like yours or like ManTech, for example, obtain work in the engineering services sector? So, is there something special that that business has to do to actually win a contract?
Yeah. So when it's possible that they just give companies the work, but that rarely happens. In some cases, you might have a special business designation, like a small disadvantaged business, where the customer might give you the work directly, or have a technical rationale as to, hey, you're so special, you're the only person that makes a fuzzy purple computer with gumball keyboards, whatever it might be, only supplier in the world, you get the contract. In most cases, they compete the bids. So we talked about, well, let's talk about like buying a car, right? It's like if you might find the car you want, but you're going to go to multiple dealers to find out where you're going to get the best deal, right? So the government does the same thing. They put out what's called requests for proposals, and then companies write responses. They write proposals and they submit them. And depending on how the government establishes the rules, they will pick a winner. Um, from a proposal standpoint and how that's done, companies, there's what we call the 7 C's, which the letter C are the things that you want your proposal to be. You want it to be concise, because nobody wants to read more than they have to read. It has to be complete, credible, clear, consistent, customer focused, and compelling. And you ask how they select a particular company is based on kind of those 7 C's. Now, what makes you special is kind of the compelling part, right? What discriminates you from another company in your proposal? So for example, if you're buying a car, one dealership might say, hey, we'll throw in 10 years worth of free maintenance at no extra cost. Another one says, hey, we'll give you, free digital radio or satellite radio for 2 years, right? These are the extra things that might sway you to choose one or the other. And then similarly, that's what we do in writing the proposals.
Sure. Yeah, it sounds similar to a college application process or something of the sort.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where you have the company is sort of trying to showcase what it has to offer, especially in terms of that specific engineering service, and then the government picks accordingly.
Exactly. They'll right. You have scores, SAT scores,
Yeah.
where they're going to grade you on that. But then you might have an essay as well, where they want your essay to come from the heart and be compelling and tell them why you're the right person. Same thing as resumes and job applications, I would say as well.
Sure. And on the U.S. government side of things, do they have a specific department that does this, or certain personnel who manage these bids or listings?
Good question. Typically within NASA centers, the Air Force or Space Force, there are organizations called the acquisition organization. Mm-hmm. And their responsibility is for doing just that, acquiring work, whether it be services or hardware or whatever it would be.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And that does follow up with the next question. So to piggyback off of that, what is the relationship between the government and contractor on the engineering contracts that are agreed upon and won? And how is that relationship between the government and the contractor maintained?
Yeah, so I think the best relationship is one where the contractor acts as what we call a trusted partner. So that's kind of an extension of the government. You're working on behalf of the government, side by side, lockstep, in sync. That doesn't always happen. And so there's obviously a contractual relationship where, in theory, everything should be clearly defined as to the role of the contractor and the role of the government and processes and how that relationship works. So, there's also a personal kind of relationship that you need to maintain. There are stakeholders between the customer and the contractor, and those relationships need to be maintained to ensure that you're well liked and everything's going smoothly. So there's a lot of communication dependency in terms of maintaining that relationship.
How do you stay organized and delegate tasks to workers in order to achieve the maximum efficiency with a project?
Organization is a challenge. I'm sure it's a challenge for you as well, as we were talking before this call. I used to get 200 to 300 emails a day. So trying to stay organized and on top of that was it was a constant firefight. Mm-hmm. I think everybody, and I've looked into this because I'm curious as to how people stay organized. I think every person has their own approach and tools that they use. I'm a list type person, so I like to write lists of of the
Yeah.
things I need to do. Then I prioritize them. Then I rewrite the list. Um, that's how I like to do it. And I also like to use my Outlook calendar a lot.
Mm.
I learned from a graduate student at UCSD that he would be given a homework assignment, and he early on in his educational career there, he realized that the problem sets that were given could never truly be completed.
Mm.
He could spend a year on a problem. So what he would do is he would just allocate a certain amount of time. And so I've taken that same approach to say, okay, how long should it take me to do this? And then I block that time in my calendar to try and get things done. So that's kind of how I stay organized. In terms of delegation, um, to kind of maximize your efficiency, you know, communication is very important. If you're not communicating clearly what you need the person to do, and they aren't understanding and they're not asking you questions to clarify, it's gonna fall apart. So, and you don't want that to happen. I mean, if your employees fail, it's a reflection on you as a leader, because your goal is to make sure that they're successful.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off what you said about organization and having a calendar and the to-do list. I'm personally very similar to that. I use Google Calendar and Notion for my to-do lists,
Mm.
and I've seen that people who don't have any personal organization for their task management don't get as much done as others.
Hmm.
Um, and also being a club leader myself, what you said about communication being key for delegating tasks to your people under you, and also if you're the person who's under asking questions about a task that you're delegated, um, is really vital to the whole process of getting things done as a team. And to go into a little more depth on sort of that area, what are some key leadership skills needed for project and employee management in the services, in specifically your engineering services industry?
Another good question. Um, I think a leader needs to have a vision and a strategy, or at least understand the vision and strategy, right? It might not be their own, might be adopted from above, and then make decisions based on kind of that structure. I'm a big fan of mentorship. I wouldn't be where I am today without having the skills of mentorship. It helps not only the people that work for you grow, but it actually helps you grow as well. Um, Recommend not only having senior mentors for you in your career, but also junior mentors, because I think what you'll find is as you graduate, there starts to become this gap between you and the knowledge of what is really cutting edge. And so having younger mentors, they can help you um, stay informed as to what the latest and greatest is. I mentioned communication. I think the other one that I'll throw in there is really empowering the people that work for you. As a leader, you need to be able to trust people, and if you trust them, they're more likely to trust you. And so, empowering people to make decisions and helping them grow um, will position you to kind of move upward within an organization, because everybody below you is getting better, and hopefully you're moving up through the ranks together.
Sure. Um, can we go back on one thing you said? You said regarding it was the first thing you said was can you remind me again?
Vision and strategy.
No, before that.
Uh,
It was mentorship. That's what it
oh,
was.
mentorship. Okay.
Yeah. You said getting mentorship from people younger than you.
Yes.
Can you sort of go more into detail? I thought that was really interesting because one thing that I noticed specifically in any STEM industry is that things are moving so fast, and new technologies are always coming out every day. And so the more older and quote unquote experienced people within that industry actually start to lag behind if they don't
Mhm.
stay up to date with what's coming out. So is that sort of what you were alluding to when you said getting mentorship from the people who are younger?
Absolutely, right? I mean, the point is, and I remember this when I graduated from college, I was learning about cutting edge technology, right? What was being done in genetics research and everything. That is so outdated as of now, right? And so, really, the only way to stay in touch with that is either doing a tremendous amount of learning and probably picking up textbooks from USC or wherever on a regular basis and reading them, or staying in touch with individuals that have knowledge that's more recent and relevant than you do. So having mentorship, where a lot of the engineering services companies are going right now is data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, right? All these technologies that are now maturing that have been researched for probably the last 50 years, um, but they're now maturing to a point that they're becoming readily implementable on programs. And so the best way to stay in touch and understand that is by having people that are graduating now that have the latest and greatest knowledge of it. So that's why I think it's important to have younger mentorship as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
What were the greatest challenges associated with you mentioned you had a $500 million JPL ICE contract, ICE. What were the challenges associated with that?
So in the contracting world, if you have a contract for 20, 30 years, it's really hard to what we say unseat,
Hmm.
compete and beat that company. Um, because they have such a strong relationship, they know that customer and they know the customer maybe in some cases better than the customer knows himself.
Hmm.
The real challenge was I don't think we talked about this, but this was what's called a best value competition. There's two types of competition, not two types, but two ends of the spectrum. Low price, technically acceptable is like, hey, if you're going to mow my lawn, you're just going to cut it. I want it 2 inches tall. Give me the cheapest price.
Hmm.
Best value on the other end of the spectrum might be, well, I'll cut your lawn, but I'm going to plant all these pretty flowers along the trim for you every spring. Okay. Um, there's price sensitivity, but it might be a different offering that provides you better value. So this was a best value competition. So the challenge was finding where to price the bid and then having enough discriminators that go along with it that would convince the customer to possibly spend a little bit more money, but maybe get more out of the relationship. So that is a little bit of a black art that I won't claim to understand because there are specialty companies that do that crazy modeling simulation analysis. But I think that was one of the greatest challenges. You might have a great proposal, but if you're 10% more expensive than the company that's currently doing it, customer might not buy it.
So the two factors that made it challenging, you said, were the fact that it was potentially a little more expensive, and then on top of that, you were trying to unseat a contracting company that had been doing what they were doing with JPL for so many years. And at that point, it becomes like they are basically so integrated and so used to what they do that for you as a company to go in there, you have to offer something spectacular as an incentive for JPL to want to take you over somebody they've been with for so many years, correct?
Exactly. Exactly.
Good. I summed it up correctly.
I know. I might use what you just said right there for my next proposal.
Yeah, yeah, there we go. What were the top lessons learned from the contract win and transition of that contract?
Yeah. There when I look back at the process, which a company winning a $500 million job, they could easily invest a couple $1 million to write a proposal and pull a team together to do this type of thing. And they want to make sure that it's a good investment, and they're going to get the right return on investment. And so there were moments where they really needed, there was a lot of uncertainty whether or not we were actually going to bid the job or not. And you have to be willing to champion something that you truly believe in, and take a calculated risk. So that was one of the big lessons for me, because I had to step up and do that, as did other individuals, be kind of champions at the moment, to really advocate for why we were doing it. And then the other one, I know you only asked for one, but the other one we talked about previously is really never underestimate the challenges of communication. So it's, I've got a little bit more on that a little bit later.
Cool. Can you elaborate on a current contract or service that you are working on right now?
Yeah, so one of the current contracts I'm working on where I'm supporting ManTech it's called the Launch Enterprise Systems Engineering and Integration Contract. So they're helping the Space Force to buy the launch service from companies like SpaceX and United Launch Alliance, right? Because the government doesn't actually own the rocket. They're just basically buying a bus ticket to get the spacecraft from the ground to where it's got to go in space. So it's a service. And so ManTech is helping with the systems engineering, integration, safety and mission assurance, acquisition support, right, to acquire those services to compete the contract. And and they're helping launch the rockets out of Vandenberg Air Force Base and Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. So it's rocket scientists and engineers and people that are a lot smarter than I am.
All that good stuff.
Yeah.
How's it how does it to feel to, or how is the experience of getting to a point where you're the project manager of engineers who are possibly more skilled or knowledgeable than you
It can be challenging. You know, I was a very young program manager overseeing, PhD physicists and master's level electrical and mechanical engineers, for the contract here at JPL. It can be challenging, but it's very exciting, I think, from a program management perspective, because you get to see the big picture. And just like, I guess, maybe my physics background, I want to see the big picture. I want to understand why. And so I really enjoyed, my program management, as well as being a VP and then having multiple programs beneath me, because I just love that perspective.
Great. So now I'm going to ask you about your outlook on the whole industry
Hmm.
that you're in. So how does a company like ManTech or Tyton, for example, stay relevant and best position itself for success amongst an industry that is always changing regarding the technologies and the ways that contracts are signed?
Yeah, so similar to getting a junior mentor to make sure that you're in touch with the latest and greatest cutting edge technologies or learning, the same goes for business, right? You have to evolve your business to um, ideally stay ahead of where the government customers are going. So we see this a lot in the requests for proposals and requests for customers. They want to see innovation. They want to see how you can integrate data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence into what they're doing on a daily basis. And if you're not innovative, um, you probably won't maintain your contract base.
Yeah. I mean, got to do what you got to do.
Yep.
Stay in. Has the COVID pandemic affected certain sectors of the field in any ways, or innovation in any ways? Or has it accelerated anything?
Yeah, I would say it probably has accelerated. I mean, with the whole, majority of the companies I know and people that I know are working at home because of the coronavirus situation. So I think customers are revisiting whether or not they actually need this labor workforce sitting in their offices, or, it'll be interesting to see how this pans out over the next 6 months. Um,
Mhm.
some industries I think are affected because some people can't be on site. They're just not requiring them anymore. But the space industry in general is booming. Um, they're still building rockets. They're still building satellites. They're still launching. Um, they've adapted to the remote work environment, and it, what I'm hearing from some is they feel like things are accelerated because this work-life balance thing is kind of blended in working from home. People don't have to drive long distances to get to the work. So space industry is very healthy.
That's interesting that the space industry is accelerated because, I mean, you'd assume at first thought that in the space industry you need people on site, you need engineers in a place actually making something, which obviously isn't very socially distanced. But the fact that it is accelerating with this work from home thing is interesting, because you'd assume at first thought that it would just be digital industries that are accelerated,
Mhm.
software, so on and so forth. But that's cool.
Yeah.
How does the future look for engineering services contract, or for engineering services and the government contracting industry, um, post COVID and the future of COVID?
Yeah, I would say overall very good. I think one of the challenges for some small businesses is there are initiatives to consolidate contracts. So, for example, in NASA, there's contracts like at Armstrong Flight Research Center and Ames Research Center, which are both in California, and they're looking to consolidate contracts that support each of those locations into a singular larger contract, which
Mm.
makes it harder for a small business to compete because it becomes a lot more complex because it's larger, it's geographically separated. So there's some challenges associated with that, but from a space industry perspective, space is an incredibly important domain, as kind of evidenced in the development of the Space Force. And, if you listen to any of senior leadership on the Air Force or Space Force perspective, they talk about the importance of the space domain. And, we're trying to return to the moon. We're trying to put people on the surface of Mars. The space ecosystem, business ecosystem has really evolved over the last 5 years with some disruptive providers like SpaceX, and it's really an exciting time to be in space.
Out of curiosity, sort of my own question, do you think that Elon Musk's plans to take people to Mars is a I'm assuming it's a good catalyst for the engineering services industry, correct?
Yeah, because you got to figure out how that's going to happen, right? So it's definitely funneling money into the space market. So,
Cool.
yep.
Yeah, that's something I'm very interested in personally. Everybody's talking about it as well. So,
Interested in going or just interested in general?
uh, I don't know about going, but I'm interested in the whole idea of it,
Yeah,
definitely.
it's
Maybe
cool.
when I'm 70 years old, but we'll see about
Okay.
that. Do you have any recommendations? Sorry, wait. So we're gonna go into recommendations for USC students, any business club students, and people who want to seek future employment in the industry. How important is networking for entering the engineering services and contract industry? We know it was important for you more or less because you got put into that place through where you worked at. But if uh, you were a student who wanted to get into it now, is networking is it important?
Absolutely. And maybe easier nowadays than it was when I first started out. But yeah, it's really, I would imagine it's difficult to get that first job. I think everyone should do internships. I think that's almost a necessity nowadays. And then while you're in those internships, make sure you establish your networks, grow your networks, ask probably as many people as you can for mentorship or informational interviews to understand what people do in their roles. and just try and develop relationships, because it will pay off when you see a job requisition and you know somebody in that company. Maybe they can get you connected. Networking is critical.
Okay. And what is the approach for getting a job in your industry? You mentioned networking, but can you detail a step-by-step approach to, once, let's say, you have a network, getting a job for a company?
Yeah, so if you're just blindly responding like to a job requisition, I would say some of the most important things are similar to kind of a proposal process. How are you going to discriminate yourself from everybody else, right? What I like to do is I will take the job requisition and I will decompose it into all of the requirements. So anywhere it says you shall have this years of experience, you must have this, right? Anything shall and must are requirements. And then you have to integrate those into your resume. Ideally, you have a bullet for each one of those items, because I help out with recruiting. I'll have 100 resumes sitting on my desk for one internship position, and you want to find the one that speaks the right language, that has just everything that you want in a candidate. So writing and tailoring your resume for a job, as opposed to just using the same one and blasting them all out there, is so important. Probably very hard if you're applying to hundreds of positions, but maybe you're doing it for a smaller subset. Um, I think if you can find a point of contact within the company, within the HR organization, within anywhere, ask for an informational interview, right? Try and develop a relationship so that you have some communications going on. If you're selected for the interview, um, relax during the interview. We're all just people. We all want to have comfortable conversations, and it's okay if you're not the right person. If at the end you have a feeling that you're not, you say, hey, if I'm not selected for this position, could you give me feedback on how I can better prepare myself, right? Try and be honest with yourself and gain as much experience out of each activity as you can.
Sure. And are you currently taking any positions for your own company, or is it closed?
I am seeking some contingent positions, which means we haven't won the work yet. But I'd be, if people want to reach out to me, I'm more than willing to give some guidance or
Sure.
talk to them.
Sure. And if there are any USC students who are more or less interested in the future, where should they go to do so?
To get in contact with me,
Yeah.
LinkedIn is a great way to start the conversation.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for our students on critical skills for the workplace?
Well, we talked about communication, but let me revisit
Yeah,
this
we did.
for 2 seconds. So, tell a little bit of a story here. So, when I was a young program manager, the president of ManTech came out to visit us out here on the West Coast, right? They're in Virginia. And I was excited to hear what a president of a multi-billion-dollar company would talk to us about. And I was surprised and honestly shocked, because he spent the whole hour just talking about the importance of communication. And at the time, I didn't really grasp how important it was and why he was doing it. But he basically told this. He was an intelligence guy, right? And so he broke down the communications pathway from the initial thought to being formulated to coming out of your mouth or being written down on a piece of paper through a medium like air to another person where it's received, it's processed, and then from that this person has an idea. So from idea to idea, from person to person, if you take each of those blocks as it goes through the process, and if you reduce the efficiency of one of those blocks by only 5%, the overall amount of information processed as it goes from one side to the other side is degraded by a third. So 66% of the information is transmitted. So he was really trying to hit the hammer on this, just reinforcing the importance of communication. And looking back at my career, wherever there were challenges or just problems arose, a lot of it just boiled down to simple communications issues. So communications. Um, the other thing is be a problem solver. Um, don't be afraid of failure. Be an independent thinker. So don't just accept the results or direction. And sometimes you have to accept the direction and take the direction, but it's good to understand why. And because sometimes people get in this rut of doing things because they're told to do things, and it turns out that everybody's been doing it wrong for a long time, but nobody was willing to just kind of ask and understand why. So those are kind of some recommendations on skills and knowledge to have.
Wow. I think that those ideas will need some time to marinate because they're very good recommendations in my opinion. Especially what you said about communication and understanding why. I think you could write a whole book about understanding why, which there probably is a million books about that. But
It probably is.
so now that we've gotten through all of our questions, we're gonna go to the audience questions over here.
Okay.
Go ahead and take a look. Okay, so one here is, have you seen the movie War Dogs? I wanted to know your thoughts, as it's essentially about scraping up low-end military contracts off government sites.
Yes, I have seen the movie War Dogs. I read the book. It was entertaining and scary at the same time, given it was based on a true story. So those are what are called low price, technically acceptable contracts, right?
Yeah.
So again, a low price, technically acceptable contract, if I correlate it to like buying a car, it could be, okay, U.S. Postal Service, we need a mail truck. It has to have four wheels and this amount of space in the back for mailbags. Okay. The U.S. Postal Service is probably going to want to buy them as cheap as possible as long as it meets the requirements. If you're working in a best value type of a procurement,
Mhm.
it's going to be maybe buying, if you go to the full far end of the extreme, it's going to be buying a car for a Hollywood star that wants to cruise down Sunset Boulevard, right?
Mhm.
There's going to be, okay, the base, they want a particular sports car, but then all the additional bells and whistles that they might find valuable that they're willing to pay a little bit more for, right? So War Dogs was low price, technically acceptable. Um, Kind of a scary story when I mean,
I haven't seen it, so I definitely am curious now. I'll go watch it and see what you're talking about. So
yeah.
thank you. Uh, Now the next question is, did you say there are agencies that specialize in modeling contracts for best value? Did you mean that the value of contracts and buyers' interests are quantified and preceded with computers?
No, I don't think that they use really any modeling. If I'm understanding the question correctly, I don't know of any modeling that is performed to evaluate the contracts. There will be a price analysis,
Mhm.
but a lot of um, the value adds are very subjective.
Mm.
So it's um, yeah, it's really subjective, and there's a human element there where people are reading it and they're talking amongst their peers and the stakeholders that is what this contractor proposing valuable. And then the difficult part, I believe, is because I've never been on the government side, is okay. For example, it's 10% more expensive. Is all of these bells and whistles that they're offering worth the additional 10%, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the question was what you interpreted it as. Like, is there a computer an algorithmic way of sort of analyzing contract value. And going back on what you said earlier in the talk, it's like a college application process. You just have a subjective opinion and someone who looks at it and decides. I'm guessing with a group, correct?
Yes, usually there's a team of, in my experience, at least 6 people, if not up to maybe a dozen that's participating in the process. Really depends on how big it is, right?
Mm,
I mean, most of what we're going for are multi-million dollars, if not, billion-dollar contracts.
okay. Now the next question: do you have any tips regarding team building? For example, standard operating procedures.
Team building to develop standard operating procedures.
Um, I believe I believe if I'm not mistaken, I can't be speaking for him, but
Or standard operating procedures for team building.
for team building and
Uh,
for efficiency with in terms of task management in a team.
Task management. I mean, you got to make sure everybody's on the same page. I would
Right.
say that. So documenting everything, and then when you meet, make sure you're documenting who has the action items, setting what we call suspense dates, which means when are things due,
Mhm.
and then just making sure that you're following up on that. I mean, team building can be a very challenging thing. I've had the pleasure of managing over 300 something people at one point in time. And, you know, some people say it's business, it's not personal. I tend to think it's both, right? Because I am who I am and I don't separate business from who I am on a personal basis. So I tend to try and connect with people on a personal level as kind of part of my team building exercises to understand who they are and what motivates them and what drives them so that you can find common ground, because I think that's what brings people together and brings teams together is what you have in common.
So you think connecting with your team on a personal basis, each and in, each and every individual at as much as you can at least,
Hmm.
is beneficial for just efficiency overall.
Yes, I do. Because if everybody's kind of feeling like they're part of the team, then I think that there's more motivation, there's better morale. I mean, one of my bosses told me, and it's the same thing with the customer, right? I think in the contractor world, you want to be part of the customer's team, which
Mm.
is why I brought up that phrase, trusted partner. But one of my old bosses told me that he learned that when you walk into somebody's office, the first thing you do is you look around their office to kind of ingest whatever they have in there from a personal aspect, right? To try and find that common ground to connect with that person to start a relationship or build upon the relationship. So
It loosens everything up a little bit.
that too.
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen to wages as companies no longer have to compete with local wages for outside work from home employees?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, in one instance, that very thing happened. This contract that we won here, we moved away from the local labor here and started working with Virginia Tech to bring in some lower priced wages. Um, that I don't know how to answer that one. That's a very good question. I think it really depends on the industry. If it's hands-on, type flight hardware, rocket satellite systems, I don't think you can really do much of that. You could outsource some portions of it, but there are markets and there are things where, um, yeah, doing things remotely or doing things through robotic process automation, which is something that I'm very interested in. There could be types of jobs that go away.
Mhm. And uh, I think honestly, what you said, even about robotic process automation, applies to like not just your industry, but really industries all across the world, specifically in STEM, um, which honestly raises the bar for competition in whether or not your skills are valuable for a job. And it might become where a sort of situation where to be to get a job, you have to be the person who creates those robots or automates those systems or leads how things work rather than being the dummy or the monkey who does the work.
Right.
Things are
Yeah.
changing.
I mean, I started tinkering around with robotic process automation because I got bored with the selection of shows on Netflix.
Yeah.
I was helping a company do resume screening, right? 100 resumes. How long does it take a hiring manager to go through 100 resumes and find the top 10? I said, you know what? If you give me keywords, I can create a script. Well, I didn't create the script. I paid somebody to create the script, but I can set up the framework and set the rules. And I created a tool that can go through 100 resumes with 10 keywords and then sort them based on the top 10 candidates. And
Yeah.
it does it in a minute. So, you know, you gotta rely on those tools. And that's some of what I'm trying to sell to NASA customers and Air Force customers is there are ways to do things faster so that the people that you have can focus on really the things that they need to be thinking about.
Yeah. It's important to think on how you can use technology to streamline everything.
Hmm.
That's becoming more and more valuable by the day, I think.
Yep.
When it comes to learning outside of the classroom, what would you suggest?
Well, books are always good. I mean, there's a lot of resources really to enhance your skills. I mean, there's so much stuff online nowadays. You know, continuing education is a great thing. You know, a lot of companies like ManTech, they put a lot of money and they set it aside so that you can continue your education because they understand that it's valuable to customers, it's valuable to the company, and it's valuable to individuals, and it's really something that every employer should be offering um, individuals so that they can continue to grow.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't have a particular source in mind, but there's it just seems like there's so much information out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we live in a digital age, so you can learn
Yeah,
anywhere, and everything's valid because learning is learning. It's not like you need to learn from a specific place necessarily.
right.
So honestly, it seems like we've gotten through all our audience questions and all the other questions. So it seems like we should wrap this up. First off, let's see, Eric, do you have anything else to say, or are we good?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I enjoyed this. You know, I'm very much an advocate for helping people, as I feel like I've been helped throughout my career to get to where I am. So if people want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm more than willing to chat and give some advice, or if anybody wants to just ask questions, more questions, I'm available.
Sure. And we'll drop your LinkedIn link in the chat for anybody who wants it. I want to thank you, Eric, so much for being generous enough to take your valuable time to be at this event. And secondly, I'd like to thank the audience for attending. Have a great day, everyone, and take care. Thank you.
Thanks.